I'm going to go outside and take a picture of all those youngsters. Because those youngsters are the future of your community. We have to continue to nourish them, make sure they continue to make the right choices, and keep them involved in music, because when young people are involved in music, they do so much better in education. Of all the tests we've taken, when kids are involved in education, when kids are involved in music, they do so well the tests in our school. So I just want to go out there and take a picture of all those youngsters.
On this new edition of Tete à Tete on Tele Kreyol, my name is Charlot Lucien for this particular segment of Tete à Tete, which is going to be unique. Unique in the sense that this is for the first time that we'll take an entire show to pay tribute to an official who lived in Boston and who's been at the helm of Boston for more than 20 years. It is also for the first time that we have this unique configuration of guests who have worked, who have interacted with this person, with this leader, to whom we intend to pay tribute this evening. We are, of course, talking about the late Mayor Thomas Menino, who passed away in October of 2014. And for us to do this program, which is going to be a part 2, since we had one previously in Haitian Creole, we were able to connect and to invite first Dr. Yves Salomon Fernandez from Mass Bay Community College. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you.
We were able to also invite Fleur, who has worked as a chief for advocacy and economic investment for the city of Boston under Menino, correct? Mm-hmm. Good evening.
It's good to be here.
And presently the CEO and president of
Bessie Todd Wilson.
Thank you very much. And Reverend Eno Mondesir, whom we've received recently, who's formerly known as the chairman of the Haitian-American United Inc. However, people may not know it, you've also worked for a long time as an employee for the city of Boston under Menino's administration.
In public health, yes, good evening.
Thanks again for joining us. And finally, and welcome back to James Colimon, whom we've received on this show before he departed for Orlando and then couldn't sustain staying far away from Massachusetts. So now you're back again working for City Hall.
Yes, indeed. Good evening, everyone.
And currently, Mayor Walsh is liaison
to the council.
To the city council.
Yes, sir.
Thanks again. Again, all of you shared this attribute of having worked with Thomas Menino, and we would like to be able to evoke his memory or personal interactions with him, in what capacity you've worked, and also as far as his legacy, what not just the Haitian American community, but the community at large should remember of Menino. So I'll start with you. Yves, can you again remind us in what capacity you worked for or with Menino back in the days?
Yes, actually, Mayor Menino gave me, as I like to say, my first important job. And I worked for him as the policy liaison for the Caribbean community, which is a position that was, before me, had been filled by Yves d'Ambreville, whom I'm sure you know. And I have to say, Mayor Menino is someone for whom I have tremendous respect. He was someone who really had a knack for identifying talent, seeing really talented people, and who was really passionate about giving people from all walks of life an opportunity. So for me, it was great to have had this opportunity to work for him, but also to be able to shape his policies around the Caribbean community here in Boston.
Thanks. I have the same question for you, Marie. You've been actually
Well, you know, Mayor Menino, I think it's been during the 20 years that he was in office. Actually, I've had opportunity to know him during those 20 years. And didn't work for him initially. I met him in many campaigns that I worked with, first when I was in the Attorney General's office, and then when I first ran for office in '99. I remember going in to sit and talk with him about running for office. And he did come out and supported me and actually put troops on the ground in order to make certain that we were able to cover all our polls and be able to drop the materials that we needed to drop, and was very supportive And in fact, after I've got elected after many years, would ask a couple of his friends to have a couple fundraisers for me to make certain that I could get reelected. I think what I liked about him is that he would tell you what he thought, and he didn't mind hearing what I thought. We could tussle, and it would be fine. That was my experience with him. Others have had different things. He sincerely wanted to figure out how to be inclusive, but I also, you know, he is a product of his time, but overcame that time. I mean, and that's what I think is quite interesting about him, because if you think about his age and the generation that he grew up in, and he came out of busing having been a monitor on the buses. I mean, when I was a kid, he would have been one of those folks on the buses, right?
Yes,
so it was interesting to see that evolution.
We should go back to those historical moments as well. And I was going to ask you the same thing, Reverend Mondesir. In what capacity did you work for him? And then...
Well, actually, I started working in the city at the Public Health Commission in 1997, February 97, and all the way through 2012. And so my experience there has been a very positive one, because one of the things that I have noticed and that has opened my mind and my way of looking at things is the fact that when we were able to look at grants, money that was available, small packet of money to do infectious disease prevention, we went to the table among public health officials, and we tried to decide across ethnic groups, across demographics, across gender specific, in order to be able to reach out to every group in the city. And that was a very...
so the inclusiveness that Murray mentioned earlier.
Exactly.
Well. James, same thing. You've also been at some point in some capacity working for him at the Office of the Bostonians.
Yes, indeed. I had the privilege of working for Menino for almost a decade, actually. And the Office of the Bostonians, an office that he created to make sure that immigrants had a seat at the table. So they are included, they are at the center of what's happening as opposed to the margin. An office that one would think would not be popular in Boston or in other parts of the States, because immigrants are usually not as welcome as Mayor Menino wanted them to be. He wanted everybody to have a seat at the table. And he's always been able to make certain decisions that are not popular at first. For instance, I remember when the horrific event of September 11 happened, I was getting questions from places as far as Brazil, telling me, hey, my brother worked at the World Trade Center, what happened? So we didn't know, we had more questions than answers. So we put a forum together, had invited the INS, which is now Homeland Security, the AG's office, the Muslim community, bring everybody at the table. And that was not enough. So we said, hey, perhaps we should have an immigration clinic. Could you imagine that? An immigration clinic inside of City Hall?
So
still going on strong right now.
Correct. When you talk about taking stands, we've seen that immigration issues or the right of gays and lesbians, or making some tough decisions about funding that. I would also confess or share that I've been very close to his work as well as part of the Title I Planning Council, which you may know, making funding decisions around HIV and AIDS. So I was part of this council that was actually led, or the oversight was with the mayor. So he's known as the urban mechanic.
Urban mechanic.
He's been actually fixing potholes in the street. Actually, there is a very nice quote from an institution. He left to go and fix potholes in heaven, leaving these big holes in our hearts. So let's talk a little bit about, he was also known for his accent, of course. Some people actually took an entire program to actually talk about his accent. So let's talk about the lighter side of Menino that you may have seen. There are all kinds of tics, accent, thick skin. What have you seen in your practice of Menino, Marie?
Well, it's so funny. So I went to work for him. He created a cabinet called the Advocacy and Strategic Investments. And I went over there to work for him, and there were 4 divisions under there. So I got that. He loved Friday evenings. So Friday evenings, you'd find him on the 5th floor. So if you left late, he'd be sitting on the 5th floor, and you'd spend some time laughing with him. And in fact, sometimes my son would come. He always had a story from my son who would come and visit, and he would take the time. And that I noticed, he really would take the time and talk to him. So he had this running joke because he knows it drove me crazy between my son. He would say to him, "I got plans for you. I've got plans for you." So his plan was this child was going to go to the 13th grade, and I kept saying, "There's no way this kid is going to the 13th grade because I can't live through it." So they had a running joke. He loved to eat. He loved. I mean, there's not a restaurant in this city that he wasn't familiar with. He could tell you where some of the best foods were. And there was a core group of us. Every once in a while, you know, we'd go out, and he had a knack for knowing where we were. He'd call on the cell phone and ask, "Well, what are you up to? What are you up to?" Or else we'd call him on the cell phone. He loved to laugh. He loved kids, and would at every opportunity. I mean, I remember one of my lasting memories of him is going to be the year he came out of the hospital, and he could not go to, this is the first time he missed Bowden Street. For as long as I could remember, when I was a state rep, and when I worked for the 3 years that I worked for him, he would always walk Bowden Street. And the year that he was in the hospital, he had just come back from Italy and was very ill. He could not. And so, but he still wanted to come out because we usually at the center, at St. Peter's Center, they'd have a program for the kids there. So he wanted to show up. And my picture of him, and his birthday's around that time. So my picture of him is him pulling up. And the kids heard, they were all in that big gym. They heard he was pulling up. And all of them went flying out of the, and you think he was everybody's grandfather. They all went running out of there. And they sang happy birthday for him, and he, you know, it's, I mean, and that's just him. I mean, that's the kind of peace he loved.
Yves, lighter moments?
Yeah, I would say, you know, Mayor Menino had a great sense of humor, and I remember when I first started working for him, I was 20, had not quite turned 21. I didn't know how to drive, and he would always pick on me. Yeah, he would always pick on me. That was always the running joke. We had meetings. I used to work directly for Michael Knievy, and that was the running joke. And so finally, you know, Mike said, "Well, you know, Yves needs a car because I'm attending all these events." And this is a very embarrassing story, and I can't believe I'm about to say this on television. But so they said, "Okay, all right, you do need a car." Finally, I learned how to drive, right? I do need a car. And so the mayor had told Michael to give me the ugliest, oldest car that you had, because they were pretty sure that I was going to wreck it. Yeah, I was going to wreck it. And sure enough, I didn't wreck it, but I did. I was backing up, and I just sideswiped it. And the entire side, I mean, the car was like, I don't know, 15 years old. And it was just horrible. And so I remember Mike saying, "Well, you know, I'm going to have to tell the mayor." And we had meetings every Friday. So it was every Friday, all the neighborhood services folks around. And so that was the big joke, and it was very, very embarrassing. Another embarrassing moment was when I had to tell the mayor that I was marrying Steve Fernandez. And of course, you know, you know how my husband is. He's an agitator. They're both on the same side of the issues, but Steve just has a different style. And I remember I was just so afraid to tell him, and I said, I'm dating Steve."
You needed approval?
Yes, yeah, it was almost as if I needed approval.
Grandpa.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. It was, you know, just to have that adult figure, that person who saw something in you and said, you know, you could go really far, and to have been a mentor. And I remember, I mean, I'll never forget this, when I got the phone call from the mayor himself calling me and saying, "Hi, Yves, it's Mayor Menino. I'd like you to come in and tell me what you'd like to do for the city." And I was working for the Boston Banner at that time. And it's one of those moments in my life.
So he has those instinct to identify, this flair to get competent resources around him. You know, I don't know, any lighter moments, not necessarily in the context of your work. I know that community-wise, you've been also very close.
Well, community-wise, I think I have to take the audience here to HAU, and particularly the parade. Mayor Menino had a sense of engaging communities and understood the reason for the parade and the positive aspect of the parade, because even when some of the people in the Haitian community didn't understand why we had a parade, he understood, and he took the parade for himself. in a way, in other words, in a positive way, because part of the parade was to give a positive self-image, to help young Haitian-Americans develop a self-identity or a self-worth. And so the first year, we wanted to have the parade. We did not have it because of logistical reasons. But the following year, 2001, we started having the parade, and from that point on, the mayor went every place in the city talking about the Haitian parade, how it was organized and how he enjoyed it. And he walked the parade all the way from Mattapan Square to Blue Hill to Talbot Ave.
So he embraced it. James, I have the same question. Some lighter moments. I see you laughing already.
Almost as embarrassing as, well.
You don't know how to drive.
The show is confidential.
Live TV.
It's about when I was getting married, actually. I told the mayor that, I'd be honored to have him as at my wedding. And he said, people said, well, the mayor is very busy. I said, well, that's fine. If he can come, that's fine. But I'm not expecting him to come to my wedding. And he showed up with Mrs. Menino. I was very, very pleased. And during my best man speech, he said, so I asked James, how were you able to get me a Menino to your wedding on a Sunday afternoon? Because it was less expensive, of course. And and my friend said, as my best man, well, that I told the mayor it was a fundraiser. Knowing the mayor is always working.
So with all that we've heard about Thomas Menino, again, lessons not only for his colleagues, for politicians, but also for the younger growing generation, what are some of those attributes that you think made him a great leader, while he was always also presumed or perceived as an assuming person?
I'd say there was a certain humility about the mayor. Humility, but also confidence in his skills. Of course, he's been doing this forever. And also the ability to surround himself with very smart people, keeping a pulse on the city, knowing everything that's going on. Nothing was too small. And, just someone who really cared deeply about his city, wanted to know everything that's going on, and who was also, I think as Marie had said, opened to hearing different perspectives. You may not agree with him, but discourse is very important. And you find people who tolerate discourse, you find people, and you find others who embrace discourse, and you find people who squash discourse. So I'd say, even as he made unpopular, ideas, put forward ideas that may not have been initially popular, he was willing to listen to dissent, and at least consider it as he made decisions.
And before I pursue, let me just make an editorial comment here, again, for the viewers who may not be familiar or don't have all the data, all the information. Mayor Menino has been the longest serving mayor in Boston. I don't know if there are comparisons in other states or major cities as well. And this was between 1993 and 2014. So I would have the same question. Are there things, aside from what Yves mentioned, that you can pinpoint that specific attributes that made him such a leader?
I had the benefit of watching him as a colleague and then as an employee, and working for him. I think he loved this city. He got up every morning, just really committed to the city. And this is the job he wanted, and he lived and breathed it. I think he gave his body, soul, and mind to this city. I truly believe that. I think that the other piece is that because people were so caught up in how he spoke or didn't speak, they didn't catch on how bright that man was and how attentive he was to all that was around him. He paid attention. And when you think he'd sit there sometimes and just be chewing on this nail, you think that he wasn't paying attention. He's paying attention. He's very attentive. I think he's hard. He could be very hard. I mean, like I said, I've seen him in different places. But you can't run a $1 billion corporation and may have to make some tough decisions and put people in their place. I mean, I'm just, that's kind of, it can't happen without that.
It's the role of the CEO.
It is yes, exactly, and he understood that there was a politics there was the politics of governing, but he also understood he was really operating a multi-billion-dollar corporation that roads and bridges, facilities, hospitals, buildings, energy, all of that went into really running that enterprise. And he had the capacity of capturing all of that. Yes, he had good people around him, but you can have good people around you but have no common sense about making decisions. But he had good people around him, but he had common sense and understood, and he sought what he didn't know. And he also understood that you couldn't just have the people that were working for you be the only folks you were listening to. You had to have a broader audience and that of experts that you can tap. And he had experts quietly that he tapped in whether it was the African-American community, the Black, he had these experts that he tapped to help him think through. And I don't think people saw that as much because folks chose not to see that. I think he was a compassionate person. I've seen him with seniors, I've seen him with children. I've seen him, during counts, walking with him, when he's doing the homeless counts in the city of Boston. These are things he wanted to do. No, he didn't have to do it. He could have just sent the troops out, but he was very much part of it. People took a look at these ribbon cuttings and didn't get that those were opportunities for him to connect with people on the ground, regular people, to hear what they were thinking, understand how they were feeling, and to observe. And so he had a chance to do that in every part of the city. And he also knew people who wanted to take advantage.
Right.
And people whom he didn't have any patience for, he didn't have any problem letting them know. So I think I think he was decisive in many ways. He could make that decision. He paid attention. He was willing to learn. He was willing to be firm when he had to be. But I also think he was willing to seek counsel when he didn't know. And I think those were important parts of what made him so successful over the years. And God gave him this political antenna that allowed him to hit the issues right at the right moment. And that, to me, that's a pretty great compass that he has.
So that's a gift in a sense. For those of you watching this program again, our guests are Dr. Yves Salomon Fernandez, and who's worked with Mayor Menino, Fleur, who also was a senior staffer for Mayor Menino, James Colimon, who also worked as a liaison to the mayor to the Caribbean community, and Dr. Mondesir, who also worked for the city of Boston as a public health official as well. You, James, alluded earlier to immigration in the context of your work with Office of Non-Bostonians. Coming out of President Obama's recent speech pushing for immigration reform through executive order, what does that tell you, his involvement into getting immigrants to be more involved into the life of the city? And did you see concrete manifestations of this approach?
Well, the work that Mayor Menino has started with the Office of Non-Bostonians is being continued right now with the Mayor Walsh administration. And the director of the office actually had a meeting last week, actually earlier this week, I think, in reference to making sure that immigrants are not taken advantage of. Because whenever you hear that there's a new bill, some kind of an amnesty, everybody comes out of the woodworks to take advantage of the immigrant community. And the Mayor Menino, was always at the forefront of making sure that we are not taken advantage of. And the same work is being continued right now.
And to be clear, just it becomes an educational piece. In what way immigrants would be taken advantage of?
Many ways, actually. For instance, you have people that are not attorneys, that are notary publics. And as you know, being from Haiti and other parts of the developing world, I would say, a notary public has a lot more power than you do have here. But some of them think that the notary publics are attorneys, actually, that they can help you with your papers. And they charge you fees that are astronomical, and they take advantage of people.
So fraud and abuse of potential downsides of
Yes.
such those kind of issues, right? If we are talking policies, are there particular areas or policies you feel that have impacted the Asian or the Haitian-American community in particular? Mary?
Well, I think if I recalled, Boston was one of the few places that provided amnesty when a lot of Haitians were not given sanction. And that was under Thomas and Menino. And hence, and from that came the Office of New Bostonian, which really created the focus to be able to do that. As you talk about healthcare and public health, as you looked at the attention and focus that they went after some of the, the Timothy, the funds for HIV/AIDS, if you think about those policies.
Brian White.
Brian White, thank you.
Brian White.
Brian White funds.
That little ones.
Exactly. And so those funds actually, and there was a clear opportunity and direction to make certain that it was very diverse. And in fact, some of those funds went to Haitian organizations in order to help maintain and serve those communities. So it's policy that's coupled with a direct funding in order to support the work. If I think about the work that was done on domestic violence, and some of the support that was provided with respect to domestic violence, again, when I think about a lot of the women that were supported, a lot of Haitian women received support from those instances. Public housing, the expansion of access to public housing. That was another where Haitians had the opportunity to benefit. Main streets, when you think about the small businesses along Mattapan Square, some of them particularly Codman Square, because in Codman Square there was a particular relationship with the merchants in that area, working with the Codman Square Health Center, which again was an opportunity to say that we're going to reinvest in small businesses and then help with the streetscape. And so many of them were able to receive the benefits of that. So, I can go on, but I think the policies, it wasn't, I think what this Mayor's Office of New Bostonians did is that when the policies were put in place, there was also an arm to help drive those policies in order to support the various constituencies. And there's some constituencies, because of language or culture, that would never have taken advantage of it,
Right.
because they didn't know. But because the office was there was an opportunity to expand, create partnerships, and make certain that it was provided to
Yves, I
them.
wonder if you can actually touch base on the issues of education, if you have information as well.
Yeah, one of
Thinking
the
of you
things.
now as the vice president at Miami College.
Right. Right. One of the things that I think has always been helpful, one of the things that I was not with the city, but this also goes to Governor Deval Patrick passing an executive order to allow students children who came here who are under 18, came here, I think, as late as 16 years old, have not been involved with the law, and also have had no blemishes on their records, and being able, they can go to school here and pay in-state tuition, which is a really big advantage as you think of higher education, and even in the public universities and colleges, that an immigrant student would pay 10 times as much in tuition, and compared to an in-state student who pays a fraction of that. So when you have tuition being $34 a credit, for an in-state student, and then you have tuition being $340, even though that same kid was brought here when he or she was 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. So having mechanisms like the Office of New Bostonians to be able to educate immigrant parents that these are benefits that your child is entitled to, and if you don't know about it, here's information about it, and here's information in multiple languages, and understanding the cultural barriers, and how oftentimes it's not just the parent who's the decision maker, but the parent is also relying on the student who speaks English, who has better command of the culture, the way that things work, the systems, etc. So mechanisms like having the Office of New Bostonians being able to disseminate information in a timely manner and in ways that are linguistically accessible to all populations, that's a great legacy that the mayor left behind.
Some 73 languages, I think, or more.
I think there are over 140 different languages spoken in
Right.
Boston. And 1 out of every 4 Boston was born somewhere else.
Right. In our last
Wow.
show, Dr. Mondesir, you made some comments recalling his own trajectory as a student, both as a public health official but also going to school. I would like you to share again with us or with the viewers what you pointed out as a specific event in his life that led him to UMass and how he was going to embrace education to further his political career.
Well, as you look at the situation and how Mayor Menino was a public figure, public official, he also realized that there are certain positions you occupy in life. You have to have at least the degree. Not that you really need it, but it is important because somehow it's a way to pave the environment or the way for you to show that education is important. And so even though he always had contrasted his life with the President, Harry Truman, who did not have a college degree. And he joked with that, but at the same time, he came to the point that he wanted to have that degree. And so as he was leading, he was going to school and earn that degree. And so I think that's very important for our youngsters also, because if we're pushing them to educate themselves, and so there he was as the mayor of the city, and then he wasn't ashamed to demonstrate that, okay, he needed that. He needed to accomplish that. And so I think that speaks volume to understand that it doesn't matter where you come from, where you are in life. If you have a good education, then you can open doors.
A special tribute to the late Mayor Thomas Menino, who passed away at the age of 73. We are taking a short break, and then we'll be back with our guest.
When you think of Boston, Boston's a melting pot. A lot of different ethnic groups, neighborhoods. And today we're here to celebrate, and a representative, Marie St. Fleur, is walking into the room. Your guest speaker, she thought we'd be through with dinner by now. Representative, just sit down, will you? What'd you say? She spoke another language I don't understand. I just want to say to the folks here, thank you for what you do in our city. Thank you for being a very strong part of the city of Boston. You know, St. Angela's Church is, I think, your mother church, you know, the Roman Catholic Church. And Father Joy does a great job down there. So.
Again, a special tribute to Mayor Menino. I just heard him mention the word culture. I would say that I had other colleagues and friends who've also been part of his administration. I'm thinking Yves d'Ambreville couldn't be here. Senator Linda Dosenafori wanted to be here but couldn't make it. Joseph Sherry, who also worked for him. And I would just share that the first time that City Hall opened its doors to house a full Haitian art exhibit that was with Mayor Menino, and he even took one painting of the late Max Gabriel, who was one of the leaders of this group, and had it literally in his office. That was a painting representing the Park Street Pond. Just to say that again, the affinity and the connection was there. Now, we also know about Menino being a courageous man, whether it's the public looking at him trying to rise from his chair after the Manhattan bombing and deliver this soothing speech to the Boston community. Can you speak about that resiliency, courageous man?
I mean, I remember that. I mean, I was working there at the time. I think that was surprised he came out of the hospital, because my understanding is he was told he shouldn't. But I also understand that his love of this city would not have allowed him to stay in that hospital room. And I don't think there was anybody that could keep him in there when he decides he's going to do something. So there's no one that keep him there, because I think he also understood the symbolism to the people of having their leader of the city present during such a horrific time. So yes, you can have the governor, you can have the senators, you can have the state reps, but I think the symbolism, he's always been a constant. I think he understood what that meant for the people in order to keep people calm that day, and I think that's why he rose to the occasion. But you know, as we've said, he rose to the occasion when it came to gay rights. Before anybody was talking about whether or not gays and lesbians should have a right in this state, he had already had that passed in the city to make certain that people had the protection of the law in this city. I mean, I think if you think and I go back, and it goes back to who he was, he did not, people took him not wanting to talk about racism as him not admitting it. But on the other hand, I think he took it as he'd rather do something about it, and he modeled it by how he brought people around him. And I think it is through that process. If you saw how he was with people and modeling it, he believed. Now, you can agree or disagree, but I think that in other ways is the courageous steps. And he was willing to step up when you had trouble in Mattapan. He didn't just send his staff. He went and he sat at these meetings with the police when we had issues there, and he would take it and he would respond. I mean, so he would face those issues rather than walk away from it, because I think in his heart and mind it was always about moving the city forward, and therefore you had to stand up and be counted.
We, I think, remember some of those instances where doing some tough negotiations with the the unions, and then there were even talk that he shouldn't go and deliver the State of the Union address, given that the physical proximity of some of the demonstrators, and actually he held his wife's hand and walked right through the crowd to get actually to the podium and deliver his speech. Right. Now, from your own proximity with him, have you observed a moment where he had second thoughts or doubt about himself or about his decisions as a leader, as a person?
To be honest, it's been quite a long time, and I'm having a hard time reaching back to something as specific as that. But I would say, you know, one of the things that I really liked about working for Mayor Menino was that he was accessible, very accessible leader. And if you needed to talk to him about something, it wasn't time for the staff meeting, needed an opinion, you know, I could go down and talk to him. Whenever we had events together, rather than having, I always felt that I preferred to write. You know, if you know he had to deliver something, you know, I'd prefer to write the first draft for him to make his own, as opposed to having the press office do it, because I felt like, you know, I know how he feels about the Haitian community. I know how he feels about certain issues. So I would say, you know, it's one of those things that I really admire, having worked for him, his accessibility, and he was also a good role model for me. And I think having had that position at such a young age, for me, when I look back, it was one of those defining moments in my life that really gave me a lot of confidence in terms of what kind of responsibilities I could take, I could handle, I could assume. And also to be able to have a great leader model great leadership for you, and be able to have these insightful moments, these small conversations where I feel like I need another opinion. I remember when I was leaving the city, you know, I said to the mayor, you know, I want to go to grad school, and I got into the London School of Economics. And he said, yeah, that means you'll be leaving. And I said, yeah, and, you know, it was very, you know, sad moment, but to be able to have had that experience was great.
Right. You know, I heard affinity with the Haitian community. This is from Yves Gabriel. Can you interpret what might have created this affinity? Is it political? Is it personal? Did he relate to something particular with either the community or with the history of his community? What's your sense?
Well, I think it's more than one of what you said. as we all know, Mayor Menino goes back to his root as someone with immigrant background.
Italian.
Okay. Having lived in the city, being part of the social fabric, he saw things that that touched him as an immigrant. And so looking at the Haitian community as first generation or second generation immigrant, I think he knew what it took in order to be able to bring people together and to be able to listen to each group what they needed. And so, for instance, I remember one thing that I was a part of in Mattapan. I think that was between 1999 or 2002 or so. They had throughout the city what they call neighborhood policing. And since I lived in Mattapan, so I was connected with Area B3 Police Department in Mattapan. And so therefore, it was a good training. And it touched me very deeply because personally, I looked at police before as enemies. And I think, for instance, if we're talking tonight, just tonight, looking at what happened in Missouri when, the grand jury chose not to indict the police officer. And tonight, we just came from a meeting at Tall Baptist Church. People are talking about community policing again. He started it, more than 12 years ago. And so that opened my eyes, and I think it was a good thing when Mayor Menino was able to put police officers together with community leaders or clergy to do door-to-door policing,
Right.
because at that point, people did not see the police as an enemy. That was a good thing. And I also have to touch on one piece that former Representative St. Fleur also helped orchestrated. We didn't just rise to having the parade. Representative St. Fleur was very instrumental, and the mayor also allocated resources, because one thing that I don't know if the Haitian community takes note of, there are very, very, very few communities that have parade in the city of Boston that do not pay police detail. And so therefore, having the parade and having the police with us and not having to end up with a bill in HAU, that was a great impact.
You let the secret out now.
Time is running out, of course. I'm not asking you to be a political analyst per se, but again, it is across the board accepted that Thomas Menino from 1993 up to 2004 took Boston to another level, whether you are talking about technology advancement in Boston or in Massachusetts, whether you are talking about getting some of those people from different backgrounds to be more involved in the life of the city. So I would ask, from your perspective, if you think of things that he would have wanted to continue or to achieve had it not stopped, what are some of those areas where you think that should be part of his legacy and that needs to be further worked on? It's an open question if you think of something.
I think Tommy Menino's work was done with the city of Boston. That's my personal feeling. Sometimes God puts you in a place at the right time for the right reasons, because the Boston that I grew up in, he transformed, where my children don't have any recognition of the Boston that I grew up in. And I mean the physical Boston. I grew up in Upham's Corner. I grew up not too far from Dudley Street. I'm still there. And the transformation of those neighborhoods, the real investment in those neighborhoods is phenomenal. I remember when the Urban League came, I took people on a tour. See, I remember Orchard Park before it was Orchard Gardens. I remember what was in Dudley Commons. I remember the transfer stations on Dudley and Hampton Street. I remember the burned buildings, because I used to walk to school every day, all up along Blue Hill Avenue and Dudley Streets. I remember all the empty lots. I remember when El Sombrero was that big blue building on Dudley Street, and now you have the Croc Center. I remember all the, so you know, like I said, the city that I grew up in is not the city my children experience, and they have no clue about it. And so I think he physically rebuilt every neighborhood in the city, and then he had a commitment to making certain that those services that were available. When I was growing up, if you didn't live in a certain neighborhood, you didn't get your trash picked up on time, your streets were never cleaned, and you were lucky if you called a police officer if they'd show up. I'm sorry, that was the deal. But he actually made it a premium and demanded that service be provided across the board to every neighborhood in this city. So he has built the infrastructure. I think we're moving to a place where I think this next gentleman, who actually I like a lot, Marty Walsh, I think it's his turn. And he's going to build, there's a people piece that has to be built in this city in order to close the income gap, the wage gap that exists in this city. Tommy Menino was one of the smartest guys, you know, because when everybody was talking black and white, he already saw where the city was. When everybody was doing their campaigns based upon a Boston that existed 30 years ago, he knew that Boston had changed. He knew because he spent the time in the neighborhoods. You know, when people talk black, he knew even within black, there was diversity. Very few people got that black, there was diversity. So he was ahead of the curve on all of that. Why? Because if you go in his neighborhood right now, most of that neighborhood, when I was a kid, my girlfriend moved on Hyde Park Ave, they firebombed her house, okay? That was the Boston I grew up in. Now you grow up all along Hyde Park Avenue, and there are Haitian families, there are West Indian families, there are white families, all along of that. That's the Boston that he transformed. The Boston from ones where you were firebombed, where you wouldn't find a black or brown person on D Street projects, but you do find them there. That's the Boston that got transformed. And so I think he did his work. And unfortunately, he didn't get that time to sort of sit back and enjoy it. They took him to a better place.
I think I entirely agree with Marie. I think his work was done here. I remember we were having an event with the We Are Boston event, in which we were honoring the great Bill Russell. And Bill Russell said to me that...
Let me make an editorial comment. Top-notch Boston Celtics basketer for those who are not from Boston.
And do you know that he's been to Haiti?
Bill Russell?
Yes, he has.
No, I didn't know that.
And he was telling me, you know, we were talking, and he said to me, you know what, I was talking to Tommy, and I said to him, what do you want out of life? And the mayor answered, I want to be mayor of Boston. Wow. And Bill also said, what do you mean? You're already the mayor of Boston. He said, no, you don't understand. I want to be the mayor of every single neighborhood of Boston. That's the man. We
heard such statement actually in one of these HAU galas as well. You know, not bringing your own current background as a reverend, but I would like to comment on the fact that Thomas Menino, as I understand, lived in the same house in Redville, near Hyde Park. The same, I would say, little
Cape.
Simple Cape.
Simple Cape house for years. What does that say about the man who's been the most powerful leader in Boston and who at some point even became, is it the president of the National Conference of Mayors?
Yes, he was.
Despite the so-called speech impediment. So what does that say as far as his character or philosophy?
Well, I think we have talked quite a bit about his public life, his political life, his political career, but also there was a spiritual side of Mayor Menino. And as you can see at his funeral, where that was held in his neighborhood where he grew up, and the priest that celebrated his homegoing in a spiritual jargon. And also the way that he lived exemplifies a simple life. Sometimes that a religious person may be called to live or to exemplify, because when you get to positions, it's very easy to get the power into your head and forget where you were, or just keep moving. But I think his spiritual dimension kept him simple to look at himself as a person, people's person, and how he wanted to be an example. And so therefore I think that was a great thing that he was able to reflect across the city as the first resident, but at the same time as someone who could relate to everybody.
We have 2 minutes to take maybe a 30-second statement from each of you.
You know what I wanted to say, I would be remiss if I didn't comment on Menino's legacy on the school department and the work that he done, his commitment to closing the achievement gap, and also working with, trying to work with the community colleges with the facilitating the growth that Bunker Hill Community College has experienced before, and also during the economic recovery, during the recession and the economic recovery. I think those speak to the infrastructure and also the hands-on work that Mayor Menino did in terms of bringing together educators, policymakers, business and industry to make sure that we invest in children's education and we work towards closing the achievement gap and see it as a continuum from pre-K until they get into college, finish college, and get employment.
Thanks, James.
Well, I would say that in October, the world, not only Boston, but the world lost a giant, you know, and he went to fix potholes in heaven.
Thank you. Marie, final comment?
I'd simply say that he had a wonderful partner in life, and that was Angela Menino, because no man does this by himself. And he did this with his wife all the way. And we thank her for allowing us the privilege of having him be in our lives.
Thank you again to all our guests, Marie Fleur, Yves, Dr. Yves Salomon, Fernandez, Mondesir, and James Colimon. This was an opportunity for us to share some memories of Thomas Menino and understand how he related and how the Haitian community related to him and to his policy. Again, this is one of those rare moments where we choose here at Tele Kreyol to make such type of program, and it is well deserved when we talk about Thomas Menino. Thank you again for watching this program, and until next time, Charlot Lucien for Tête à Tête on Tele Kreyol.